Welcome back to our channel, where we bring you dramatic stories, unexpected developments, and secrets hidden deep inside each character. Today, we will take you to a haunting story, delving into the spiritual tragedy and the struggle for survival on the edge of truth and illusion, where a medical diagnosis not only turns a life upside down, but also pushes a person into the depths of fear and madness. Follow the chilling and tragic journey of Martin, a once strong and ambitious man, but suddenly becomes a prisoner of his own mind after discovering the most terrifying truth: he has a brain tumor. Martin begins to feel strange changes in his body not long after his work reaches the peak of success. Just when everything seems to be going well, the dull, nagging pains, like a silent warning, begin to appear. At first, it was just mild pain in his temples, which he thought was just stress or a lack of sleep. But in just a few short weeks, the pain became so intense, irregular and prolonged, that he collapsed in the middle of the conference room, before the stunned eyes of his colleagues and partners. At that time, he did not want to believe that anything serious was happening. But his body betrayed him every day. Martin not only had headaches, he began to forget appointments. Words that had been uttered just a few minutes ago also became strange. He found himself in a daze in his own house, lost among familiar objects, as if all his memories had been stolen by someone. The disorientation made him feel like a soul trapped in a world without logic. Friends and relatives began to advise him to see a doctor, but he refused, because a part of him still wanted to believe that everything would pass. But the truth was not what he expected. Until he screamed in pain like his brain was being torn apart, and was rushed to the hospital in a state of panic. Martin had no way back. After a series of tests, MRI images, the doctor entered the room with a serious face. And then, a sentence changed his entire life: he had a brain tumor. A large tumor was growing in the frontal lobe, which controls memory, emotions, and reason. Martin was stunned. In that moment, the world around him stopped. He could hear nothing but the pounding of his heart and the echo of that sentence, like a death sentence without a time limit. From that moment on, Martin was no longer himself. He began to fall into a state of extreme confusion, constantly torn between reality and paranoia. The chaotic memories made him lose his way. One day he woke up and couldn't remember his name, who was standing next to him, or what day it was. He wrote everything down on paper, but he couldn't recognize his own handwriting. Each line became a clue in the survival game between reality and illusion. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw a strange face staring back at him, lifeless eyes, pale skin, and an expression that was a mixture of fear and anger. Panic took over his mind little by little. Martin began to believe that someone was controlling his thoughts from afar, that the tumor in his head was actually a spy device implanted in his brain to manipulate his behavior. He began to smash things, cut his own hair, and scratch his scalp, thinking he could take it out. Close friends gradually distanced themselves from him out of fear. His family had to put him in a special treatment center. But instead of improving, Martin's condition worsened. He refused to take his medication, believing that the doctors were plotting to poison him. Every time someone entered the room, he screamed, pushed, and hid in a corner like a cornered wild animal. He heard whispers calling his name in the middle of the night, saw eyes following him from the paintings on the wall, saw doors opening by themselves without anyone touching them. The doctors concluded that the tumor had severely affected his central nervous system, causing him to show signs of acute psychosis. One night, Martin escaped from his hospital room, wandering through the cold, maze-like hallways. He opened each door, screaming his name as if searching for his lost self. When the security guard found him, he was standing in the middle of the hospital yard, bareheaded in the rain, muttering, "I am not me." After that incident, he was forced to move to the isolation ward, a place reserved for dangerous patients. In the following days, Martin barely communicated. He would stare into space for hours at a time. When someone walked in, he would turn his head very slowly, as if he were struggling to move, and just stare at them without blinking. Many nurses said that it made their hair stand on end every time they met that gaze, because it was unusually empty, no emotion, no reason, just the cold presence of a broken soul. Despite intensive treatment and close monitoring, Martin seemed to be drifting into another world, where everything was unreal, where no one could reach. As time went on, Martin began to react violently to light. He said that light burned his mind, that every ray of light was a needle piercing his brain. He smashed all the light bulbs in his room, covered the windows with everything he could find, and lived in complete darkness. In the darkness, he wrote on the wall in blood, whose name was unknown, indecipherable words, as if it were a language that only existed in the afterlife. Doctors were completely helpless. No one could approach Martin anymore. Relatives were not allowed to visit. Psychologists had to monitor him via remote cameras. In those recordings, Martin often talked to someone who did not exist, laughed, cried, screamed, and then fell silent like a stone statue. At one point, he pressed his head against the wall for 3 hours without moving, blood flowing from his forehead to the floor in a long streak. Although there was much debate about whether to operate on the tumor, doctors ultimately decided not to intervene. Martin's mental condition was too severe, and any surgery could cause him to die or go into a permanent coma. Martin is now a prisoner in his own head, the head that betrayed him, that plunged him into a nightmare with no way out. His life ended not with an end, but with the agonizing prolongation of a living tragedy, where people still breathe but are no longer present. Follow and subscribe to our channel to continue discovering deep and creepy stories like this. Thank you for accompanying Martin to the end of the haunting journey, the man drowned by his own brain.